Yes, President. No problem. Geen probleem. Opgelost. Yes. Okay, good afternoon. The first thing that I have to ask or to mention is that we are recording this event. So if there is anyone having a problem with that, make it known. Otherwise, we start the recording. But well, first of all, a very warm welcome to all of you, and a special welcome also to the element of the city of Maastricht, who will address some words to us within some moments. And also a warm welcome to, but suddenly I'm missing him, or Mr. Tillemans, or deputy, okay, or deputy of Secretary General of the Benelux Union, who's also here. And of course, very warm welcome to our panelists of today, starting with Jeroen Leenaert. Also, happy birthday, because you are celebrating also this beautiful day with us. Thank you for joining us. A very, very welcome to you, Fabienne Hendricks, and our item colleagues, Pim Mertens and Martin Unfried. Martin will be the moderator of today, this event. Warm welcome to you, Karen, Jacob, Smit-Jacob, and also a warm welcome to you, Teun Jansen. Today, we will have a table talk. Later on, there will be a debate. As of item, we are focusing on border regions in Europe. So it is very important when we are talking about Europe and looking into the elections. What does all these programs mean for all of us regarding border regions, and what are the new parliament are going to do on that? And what does the European Commission later on do with that? So we are very interested in that. As of item, we have made a reflection on that. You will hear later about that from our colleagues. But for now, I would like to give the floor to our element of Maastricht, Mr. Hans Bastiaans. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. A warm welcome as well. My name is Frans Bastiaans, as you told. I'm part of the city board. A warm welcome to our city. Let me stand here so I don't have my back to you. A warm welcome. It's a beautiful day. It's not a better time or a place that you could look ahead for elections and think about election outcomes. Okay. All right. I'm willing to move left and right. No problem. So it's a beautiful day. It's a great place to meet each other. And tonight I'm really looking forward to the debate. And of course, within Europe, within the world, we're living in an exceptional era, at least in my time. I've never seen so many issues, so many challenges, so many tensions in the world as we are having right now. And the stakes have never been higher than at this moment. And I think this is the time where Europe, the European Union, will have to show leadership in solving issues. If at any moment in time, in my lifetime, this is the moment to do so. It's time for challenges, vision, strategy, and the promise of a good life in Europe. And of course, everybody is for a good life in Europe. But no doubt this will ask painful contributions from all of us living in all these member states. But vision and giving us a strategy and looking ahead where the EU is going to is more important than ever. And of course, before we always had this traditional left-right divide, where you could look ahead and you'd say, okay, how many will vote to the left and how many to the right, and what will be the outcome of the elections? That is less of a measuring instrument than ever before as well. Now we see that it's more issue-oriented, and that we see going across left and right, the same issues now are addressed, and we sort of get new political party system because of that. You get new political identities, you could say. Yeah, and those topics, no doubt, these large topics, whether it's migration or the war with the Ukraine, or whether it's climate change, no doubt are all in the agenda tonight. And we're not addressing that this afternoon. So instead, I would like to elaborate shortly on the European border regions, which we are one of right here, at Meuse-Rhine. You're in the middle of Europe, of the regions, I would say. 1/3 of Europe's populations live in these regions, and 40% of the European territory is made up out of these regions. They are the living labs of the European integration, where on a daily basis people experience Europe. The borders, whether they are there or whether they're not. And let's give an example, the border between Luxembourg, Germany, and Belgium. There are every day from the French side, 100,000 French traveling into Luxembourg for their work there. And I know with a relative living there, whenever I go to Luxembourg, I know not to go in the afternoon because I'll be stuck in traffic for people going back from Belgium and then the other side to Germany. So cross-border traveling, cross-border working is a fact. It's a daily exercise for many of us, going to work, buying groceries, filling up our cars with gasoline, enjoying culture, or visiting friends or family. The EU is a reality. And probably not to your surprise, South Limburg, Maastricht region, we could probably say, is a good example for all the cliches and characteristics of a border region. We are connected with the rest of the Netherlands with only a strip of 20 kilometers wide. But we are connected with Germany and Belgium with a border of 220 kilometers. So it means we are an international-oriented region. Maybe I should better say we are an international region. We depend more on our future on the Belgian and German region than we depend on The Hague. So for us, in a way, the EU is more important. And of course, decision-making in The Hague is very relevant. But our daily lives, our economy is depending on how far we can actually cross borders and collaborate together. Now, yeah, you could say that we need the possibility for an cross-border economy. We need the ability for talent to be able to cross borders freely from employer to employer, from university to university. And despite the efforts that have been made so far, barriers in policy and legislation are hampering sustainable growth, socioeconomic development, and cohesion among people in border regions. And I'm confident that you, maybe I should say, I hope that you, present here today, are sufficiently aware of the multitude of challenges that border regions face on a daily basis. Their scope and complexity, and the fact that our economic potential is not yet fully utilized. And I'd say that's an understatement, because we just spoke about it before. If we don't manage to actually bring the regions together, this region, Maastricht, with all its potential, will be, I'd say, the Auvergne of France. We will be highly dependable on The Hague of many funds sending to us to keep up welfare and well-being. So to turn the tide, the European Parliament has an important role to play. And someone else has said before, well, it's member states as well. Of course it is member states as well, but today we are discussing the European Union, Parliament and Commission. And of course, this is where we meet. So the European Parliament has an important role to play by direct attention for border regions. European investments in border regions make an important contribution to the resilience of the European Union. And where necessary, border regions should receive tailor-made support. For example, you could have better synergies between all kinds of funds, such as the European Regional Development Fund, Cohesion Fund, European Social Fund Plus, and the European Globalization Adjustment Fund. It would enable cross-border regions to develop and implement long-term strategies based on economic diversification and reskilling and retraining policies for laid-off workers, and actually being able to work across the border with the diploma that you had in your country. Sorry. Well, the gains of this approach would be enormous. Studies have shown that in this region, there's an economic growth potential, and it's written down, it says, of 15% where borders would cease to exist. I questioned immediately, 15%? I don't believe that. I think there is more potential than 15%. But of course, economic growth of 15% is not bad at all. Knowing that the challenges of cross-border regions will further be on the agenda, Yeah, I'm going on to my. Usually I do this by heart. My name is Sarah Paper. That's when it's going on. You will be talking tonight about all the issues of all the big issues, and this afternoon on cross-border cooperation. And I would like to close off with some words of Jean Monnet, we all know as founder of one of the EU, and he said, "Europe will be forged in crisis by the sum of the solutions adapted to these crises." So he says, Europe will be forged in crisis and will be the sum of the solutions adapted to these crises. So we will be the sum of the solutions adapted to these crises. That means we have an enormous challenge together to come together and bring these solutions together. Well, I think we have an important discussion ahead. I think it was rumbling on a little bit. It was a bit of a messy opening word, actually. I shouldn't use paper the next time, just do it by heart, which is much more easy. But I'd say thank you very much for ITEM, of course, Maastricht University, EPA, and Studio Europa for organizing this afternoon's event and tonight's program. I think cross-border collaboration is one of the most important issues in Europe of the regions for all of us. Thank you so much. Oh.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we have not only to celebrate the anniversary of Jeroen, we also have to celebrate 10 years of ITEM. And I think 10 years enlargement, that's more or less the same date, no? Is enlargement on the 1st of 20. Yeah, it was 10, 20, 40. Yeah, that's the stages. So thank you very much, Anouk and Van Sebastians, for the welcome. My name is Martin Unfried. Together with Pim Mertens, we had the pleasure to look into all the manifestos of the European parties. And it was a pleasure because I have to admit, for the first time, I read them really intensively because I know there are manifestos, but to some extent, probably you do not take the effort really to read what is there and what are not the national parties writing down, what are the wish lists for the European elections, but what is more or less the compromise of the political families that come together and write a manifesto. Switch to this one. So, and I think also for Pim and me, it was interesting to see that there is such a diversity. You have then political families in Europe, they have 20 pages to describe their ideas for the next 5 years for the European Parliament. And you have others, they have how much? 120. And you have manifestos that are very abstract. We would like to see a better functioning of the internal market or the protection of the border. And others, they come with precise lists of action, what to do in different sectors. So also there is really also a diversity in quality, I would say, if you look at the manifestos. And I can really recommend that also to you to have a look, to read it. If you make a connection to our homepage and to the link where you find our reflection of the European election manifestos, you will see also a list with all the links, and you can just then go directly to a party manifesto to have a look what's in there. And what is the second surprise is, to some extent, the European Parliament is a lawmaking machine, I would say, and Jeroen can certainly confirm that. It's about regulations and directives. And in the Parliament, if you are lucky, you are the rapporteur of a very important piece of legislation, and there is a bargaining with the Council. And in fact, it's interesting that you don't see that in the manifestos. Because in the manifestos, it does not say, we would like to see a revision of Regulation X, or you hardly see a mentioning of that there should be a new proposal on a directive in the field of such and such. That's also surprising because normally you think it's about, yeah, actual legislation that is on the table, and it's about future legislation. So it stays a bit abstract with some exemptions to the rule. And we saw in the field of cross-border, 2 or 3 pieces of legislation were mentioned where you see, yes, there is really a connection to what is debated at the moment in Brussels. So that is interesting if you look at manifestos, and to some extent for the outside world, even we had to struggle a bit with the idea, yes, you have the political groups in the European Parliament. Normally you are a bit, if you know Brussels, familiar with the names. Now the Liberals, for instance, they have renewed the names. But you see then in one political group in the Parliament, you can find 3 different groups. And so, for instance, I take the Liberals as an example. There is then the ALDE group, and they have a manifesto. And then you have the European Democratic Party within the Liberal group, and they have their own manifesto. And then you have the group of Macron, and we haven't found there the manifesto. I don't know whether it exists at the moment. So you see how tricky that is also for the outside world now to know what is now the position, for instance, of the Liberal group in the Parliament. It's a bit easier with the Social Democrats and the European People's Party, because there is not another political party within the political group, but also if you talk about the Green Party, you have there also the European Free Alliance. There are people who are more for regionalism, the Catalans and others are in this group. So you have there also in the group of the Greens and EFA, you have 2 different manifestos. That makes it a bit tricky, I have to say, from outside to know exactly what is now the position of the political groups. And you see also, if you look into then the results, if there is a vote, it is of course not as it's very often at the national scene that you have there the opposition and the government. And if there is a vote, you have the discipline of the political groups that they have to vote with their group. If you see, for instance, on 10 of April, I think there was the asylum vote in the parliament. If you see the division of votes there, the Social Democrats, there was I think 20% who voted against the asylum pact, but also in the European People's Party, there were around 20, I think, % of the members who voted against it. So you see there also, it is of course not as at the national level that you have there this clear discipline. So we looked into the manifestos, and that means we do not talk about all different types of things. We only talk about where we found the border region and the cross-border territories. That was our assignment. And that is very exciting because to some extent, we saw a lot of things we did not read in the papers. For instance, we start with the first one, which was very interesting: cohesion funds and structural funds and Interreg funds. If you talk about cross-border cooperation, for instance, here in this region, a lot of projects we know are funded by Interreg. I think most of it is funded by Interreg, but there are no concrete now statements about the future of Interreg in the manifestos. There is a certain support for cohesion policy. Yes, we support that there should be cohesion policy, but not really in detail saying Interreg does not work, or it works, or we need more money or less money should go to the border regions, which is a surprise. But it's also true for the Regional Development Fund as such. There is also not a lot of analysis, what should be done with it, more or less money. I don't know what is the reason, perhaps also within the political families. It's difficult, for instance, to find there a compromise or a joint statement. That could be one of the reasons. What else have we to say about cohesion?
To emphasize why it would be a surprise, it's also because currently the cohesion policy has to be reformed, or might be reformed. but it's again open for negotiation. So this term for the European Parliament, very important for the next future of cohesion policy and the cohesion funds as Interreg is. So that's why we were a bit maybe biased, like searching for, can we find something? But we did not really. So it was.
Yeah, we come back to that, of course, if
Yeah,
we later ask you about Interreg, for instance. It's also interesting that we had a very big Interreg project ourselves, where ITEM was the leading partner, and we looked into the quality of cooperation across the border in different sectors and whether there is a very positive effect by the current Interreg program in our region. And there is a lot to say about the quality, especially how sustainable the networks are, the cross-border networks. That has a lot to do with Interreg funding, that it's very often stop and go. We have a lot of good ideas about Interreg, how perhaps to improve it, but so that was not part of the manifestos. And now we come probably to one very remarkable thing that is very important for the whole work of ITEM, because we see it more as Europe of the cross-border regions. We know that cross-border territories are, if you look at the European map, rather 25–30% of the regions are closer to a border. And there is the understanding from our side that there is such a thing as a border region and a cross-border territory as a sort of category. And if you look into the manifestos, you see, for instance, the uttermost regions or the islands or urban versus rural areas. But there is not such a thing as a border region, as a category that is really discussed in the manifestos. And that is a problem, because that comes back if you talk then about instruments and what type of policy measures do we need in order to improve life in these border regions. So there is a problem that the border region as such does not exist to some extent in the manifestos. There are exemptions to the rule, but in general.
Yeah.
Other things?
Yeah, and the same goes a bit for regarding the internal market, which was, yeah, I think unanimously in the manifestos emphasized it's an important thing and we should work on it and we should safeguard the internal market, also given maybe the COVID experiences. But then also zooming into the internal market and border regions where we would expect that it would be benefited most. That we missed a bit, also given the experiences with COVID we had with closed, semi-closed borders or really closed borders, and also supply chains who were interrupted. There we did not find really what is in it for the next development of cross-border labor markets, for example. How can we really make it possible that cross-border workers can do the cross-border work without barriers? And that we were also a bit surprised, I'd say, that it was not zooming on this dimension.
Yeah, and there is also sometimes the misunderstanding that measures that are very positive for the internal market as such, that they are also at the same time beneficial for the cross-border territory. And we saw in the future, in the past, also from our research, that is not always the case. So you can have very, very big obstacles in a border region, despite now that we have the internal market and the four freedoms, which is, of course, related to other aspects where, for instance, national legislation is not coordinated in a border region. So the internal market is one thing, but an integrated market in a cross-border territory, that is a special thing to address, and therefore you need also different measures. And from the European Commission, we have seen that during the last recent years, a lot of very good studies saying if we take away the obstacles, what could be the benefit for the border regions, with calculations and also with long lists of different obstacles. Is it political? Is it administrative? Is it legal? Legal. So the analysis is there, for border obstacles, but it's a bit the question what type of measure and what type of legislation do you need in the future. We come to infrastructure.
Yeah, infrastructure. As we actually expected, it was also thought as a major theme in the many manifestos, is making better cross-border infrastructure throughout Europe. But there we also would like to make a distinction between what we call transnational infrastructure and really cross-border in the border region infrastructure. And there we saw that the emphasis was put on the first one. So more on transnational infrastructure between capital cities, for example, or cities where there were a certain population living in, and connecting them instead of really zooming in to the specific needs of border regions and connecting them across the border. And from our experience, but also from different studies that were done, it's not per se so that this would go hand in hand. Transnational is also benefiting the cross-border infrastructure and border regions. Now, it can also be the opposite. It can even make the situation worse in border regions when there are major transnational infrastructure.
I think the ALDE group is the only one in a manifesto who mentions the word missing links, because there is from the European Commission also a report about all the different railway links that are missing at European borders. We also know that there is a train line from Utrecht to Cologne, but we do not have a high-speed or EC line from Eindhoven to Aachen or to Cologne. So that is known, but these missing links, that's now a special thing for the border regions. And there is a study from the European Commission also saying that in the European funds for the transnational networks, you do not have these special instruments to fund also these very often small cross-border lines. And that is a clear political problem that we do not see also in European funding. They're the right instruments to fund also this cross-border dimension. The same is true for the energy transition. In every manifesto, it's about the energy transition and what we have to do and building better and stable networks. That is very often also transnational. You have a lot of mentioning of hydrogen networks and of offshore connection between national offshore wind parks. But we did a study on renewable energies in the border regions, and we hardly see any cross-border project for renewable energy. And that is also clear because there is a legal problem. You cannot transfer subsidy scheme. You have a problem with spatial planning. If you are close to the border, you have spatial planning in Germany or in the Netherlands. So it's a nightmare if you want to do that together. There we see also that Europe is at the moment addressing, you could say, the high voltage system of TSOs, transmission, what is it called, system operators, and not the level of the distribution operators. And they are the ones who could, for instance, connect municipalities, Herzogenrath, Kerkrade, where we see that it's so difficult to have joint projects. So there is also a lot to do during the next couple of years. To say also in the European Union, we need more attention also for this, sometimes all small project, but very important for the border region. Yeah, and then we come to the last and I guess most important thing, because probably that there is not so much attention for the internal borders of the European Union, and that these borders are open and that we can enjoy the four freedoms. That has, of course, to do with the situation of the external borders. Because in many manifestos, it says, yes, first point on our agenda is to protect the external borders. And we have seen in April the Migration Pact, where the idea is, of course, better protect the European Union and protect the borders. And then very often there's the link made in the manifestos, and that will mean that we can keep the internal borders open. That Schengen, the precondition for Schengen is the protection of the external border. And that's why probably also in a lot of manifestos, the problem of border controls is not so much mentioned. There is one party, the European Democratic Party, who is also part of the ALDE group, who is the only one who said we need to have an impact assessment for the Schengen Code. And the Schengen Code is now where member states can ask for an exemption for border controls. If you go to the website of the Commission, you see a list of 10 exemptions, I think, today of different border controls that are at the moment active. Germany, Poland, Germany, the Czech Republic, and all different borders where there is a control mechanism today. There, yes, we see a bit, because of the external border problem, it is not really regarded as a problem that we get more and more controls at internal borders. And more or less controlling the border is seen as a normal instrument. That is a bit our problem, because we see, no, it should be not a normal policy instrument. It should be the very last resort in your whole toolbox. So we saw that with COVID.
Yeah, it was a bit misused, so to say. It was also shown in several studies, like from a legal point of view, but also from an economic point of view. It was a bit misused, this right to close the border or to check the border, both from the Schengen Borders Control side as well as in the EU law principles. And there, it's a nice way of this impact assessment, or a nice proposal, in our opinion, of really having a sort of cross-border impact assessment in the Schengen Borders Control to see what would be the impact for border regions specifically, and is this sufficiently addressed in the whole assessment.
So in a nutshell, I think for us, the most surprising thing was that such a thing as a border region does not really exist as a category in the manifestos, and that the lack of measures, specific measures for border regions, is more or less also a consequence of this, that you see. No, it is not really seen as a thing that has its own rules, and that where you also have to develop your very specific measures. So I hope you will also enjoy then reading the details. You have it already, and you see the code where you can download and also the report. And we are very happy and looking forward to the debate. And I know, Jeroen, you have to leave earlier, is that right? Okay. So normally ladies first, perhaps then I also start with the first question to Jeroen. You have been in the parliament for 10 years now, so you can really also tell how the daily practice there is. In the first place, the making of a manifesto of a party family with 27, perhaps in your case, even 27 national member parties. How do you do that? And how do you come to these compromises in a European manifesto?
Yeah, that's very interesting, actually, because I think it's even more than 27 member states, because, of course, the EPP party as a political family is even wider than just the EU. So the funny thing is that actually from the European Parliament's perspective, we are not very closely involved in the writing of the manifesto, because the EPP party as such is the 27 plus national member party. So for us, people from CDA The Hague join with their colleagues from CDU in Germany, or from the capitals, in order to write the first draft of the manifesto. Of course, members of the parliament, specifically on the topics that they are closely involved in, will be requested for feedback. So I had some input for the migration parts of the manifesto, and then we go to the EPP Congress, which was in Bucharest this year. And we have a vote, we have amendments, we have resolutions committees, basically like we do it at the national level. We table amendments, we vote, and in the end, this is what the manifesto will look like.
So you are, I could say, member of a sort of cross-border club, because with
Yeah.
other colleagues from the European Parliament, you are very much lobbying for the interest of border regions. So how come that the word interact, for instance, is not very prominently placed in
I shall have a word. I shall have a word within my party. No, I think the problem is that these manifestos, you try to make them as interesting and as appealing as possible. Like you said, a lot of the issues we're discussing here are not issues that make the newspapers regularly. The problem with Interreg is if you would like to mention Interreg, I think it's very important and very interesting for people to mention successful Interreg projects or projects that you would like to do. Of course, this is very easy in the national election program because you have a limited amount of projects that were very successful here in the region, for instance. If you do it at the European level and you need to do it in a way that represents the whole of the European Union, it becomes a little more difficult. So what you get in European manifestos is somewhat abstract language. So it really emphasizes the importance of cohesion funding. It also emphasizes the importance of keeping this strongly rooted in the EU budget, also after 2027. But it is not going into very much specific details. I agree with that. And the same goes for, you mentioned infrastructure. Of course, if you look at our national electoral program of the CDA, we mentioned the Lely line, we mentioned the Eindhoven-Aachen connection. They're all absent from the European manifesto, because if you have to do it for all the countries, you're going to list, I don't know, 56 cross-border infrastructure connections, and it might get a little bit boring. And we only have these 26 pages that we use. So I think that's one of the reasons.
Yes, but nevertheless, you could mention that cross-border, smaller cross-border lines are very important, because there we saw a bit the transnational dimension was very often mentioned, I think also in your manifesto, but not the specific cross-border.
No, we do it very much in our national program. We didn't do it in the manifesto, so I guess it's a lesson to learn. Actually, when we made it, we said we're going to put some things not in there to see if people notice, people reading our manifestos. So I can now report back that this is something that has been noticed.
Yeah, in general, it was very interesting to see that, because we also briefly went through the Dutch national programs, that the border region and cross-border was so much more in it than the European, where you would expect it. That's cross-border by definition. But it was the opposite way around. The national were more cross-border than the European ones.
Maybe on one last point, because I think very important you said about external borders and internal borders. And no, we have to make sure that a little bit the trend in the last years was that having checks at internal borders in the EU became the new norm. And also because the European Commission was very reluctant in opening infringement proceedings against member states who were introducing border checks at the internal borders without sufficient justification for it. Last week, we voted on the new Schengen Borders Code. So it will be implemented now. And there, I think we see a much more European approach. So yes, member states can still introduce borders at the checks at the internal borders when it comes to a security threat or a health threat or a major national event or whatever, but only for a very limited amount of time, codifying the Court of Justice's rulings. And of course, if you want to extend it, it needs to be not only a decision of the member state, but it needs to be supported by a majority of the other member states. So we don't do a cross-border impact assessment as was in one of the manifestos, but there will be certainly more of a European reflection rather than only a national one. And I certainly hope that with the new rules in place, the European Commission will be a bit more emboldened to, when member states abuse it, because we've seen this without doubt, to also be the guardian of the treaties and to intervene.
Scott. I will move to Fabienne. Fabienne Hendricks is number 6 on the list of the Dutch Liberals, VVD. Also, there the question about, I don't know how familiar you are with Interreg. Is it important? Do you think that there should be more money going to cross-border projects in the future?
Yes, indeed, I would think that, but maybe just to introduce myself a little bit, I'm the number 6 of the Liberal Party in the Netherlands. I'm not a member of the parliament yet, as Jeroen is. I bring another type of experience from a more industrial company and educational institute, so that's maybe good to know. So I'm not familiar with all the topics today, but I'll try to make my best of it. For Interreg, I know Interreg. And I think it's a very important funding mechanism for the cross-border region on all type of projects. And not only the project is important, I think, but also the fact that the project leads to more intense collaboration between the nations. And the collaboration will lead to more governance type of mechanism and structural collaboration. So I think it's not only the project itself, but also the fact that it will lead to a stronger collaboration in the long term. And I think that's important. And therefore, I would say Interreg has to exist. I'm not sure if it needs to intensify or something like that. I don't know. I'm not that familiar with it, but I think it's important to have it. And to discuss also in this region, which type of projects are important for this region. I think there were many projects also on the water flood in 2021. I think that's important for the people living here in Maastricht, that we have that type of project. So I think yes.
There were excellent Interreg projects on the floods.
Yeah.
We were involved in
Okay.
one.
Yeah, that's
so
great.
I'm
Yeah.
just
Yeah, that's great.
with EMRIC, that
Yeah.
is the disaster management network here in the Region Maas-Rijn. And we did there also research on crisis management during the floods, about
That's
information communications. And
yeah, these types of things are very important, I think. Yeah.
And the new one will be on climate change. So
Yeah.
there will be one emergency cooperation with respect to climate change and new, for instance, forest fires and other things that we expect.
Maybe one other thing, I think, and I think also Jeroen said it already, even if the cross-border, because I think you have proven that the cross-border is not really a topic in the manifestos, and even maybe not in the verkiezingsprogramma's of the parties itself. But I think therefore it is very important that that people can vote also for a person from Limburg, because then you have the eyes and ears from somebody who's living here and knowing what this cross-border region means to the people. So I think that's a way also to do it.
Of course, I also wanted to introduce you a bit more. You studied European studies.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
You also studied
Yeah.
European law. I think you studied European law, and you went to the College of Bruges in Nathalie. So you see, we are surrounded by experts on European policies and European law. You could even say it's a sort of professional background that leads you to this sector. It was also a bit tricky because you also have to say it's so complex, probably you need to study it beforehand to better understand the governance system of the European Union. I come to my left to Karin Jacobs. As I said, you are a sort of multi-level animal, I would say, because you worked for the Dutch central government, you worked for a province, I think, you worked for the Benelux and for the European Parliament. So you know it all from inside. Here also with respect to cohesion funds, we saw no real concrete list in the manifestos that they would like to increase the budget for this fund or that fund, and Interreg is not mentioned. What is your point of view with respect to the cohesion policy and especially to the Interreg fund?
Yes, thank you. And also thank you for the question and the invitation from ITEM, also to Anouk Bollen. So many thanks. And I'm also from Limburg. So I think everybody here is from Limburg. I'm from Landgraaf Bolbig, for people who know this well. And indeed, I had the honor to be the EU representative of Limburg in Brussels at the House of the Provinces, indeed. So thank you also for your question. First, I would like to make a short nuance actually to the statement you've made on that the different manifestos, also the ALDE manifesto, is not mentioning, let's say, a cross-border as such. I think you could argue also that if you look at the ALDE manifesto, you could see that, let's say cross-border issues are looked upon also from an internal market perspective. And that the ALDE Manifesto goes into, let's say, cross-border solutions, projects, maybe more from a sectoral point of view. So it speaks about improving real connections, about simplified tax reporting for cross-border workers. You've mentioned already the missing links, the real connections as such. This also counts for, let's say, the assignment on energy transition. So ALDE in his, we are in our manifesto at least arguing for an EU energy network. So that includes also Limburg. So let's say it's not nothing. It's maybe described also, as Jeroen said, from maybe a different angle. And also from D66, D66, our clear message for regional policies is to reinforce border regions through, for example, an EU cross-border labor directive. So when I now come to Interreg, if you look at, let's say, the treaty, we all know Article 174 and Interreg. We know that's the basis for economic, social, and territorial cohesion. I would say that especially, well, Limburg, of course, is involved in 3 Interreg programs here, but especially the Euroregion Maas-Rijn is, I would say, a best practice and a kind of living lab for new EU policies, focused on education, on health. I mean, other topics were mentioned also already. So there, I would argue that it's important also to lobby national member states and the EU both, that for the new MFF period after 2027, there should be sufficient money still for cohesion policies, including Interreg, because we cannot give up, let's say, our function also as a laboratoire, as a, yeah, as explained just now. Yeah, maybe that is a first, hopefully, short answer.
Thanks a lot. Yes, and we noticed that the ALDE manifesto is the only one who talks about the simplification of tax declarations, I think, for cross-border workers. Yeah. So that's why it was also one of the only very concrete things we found in manifestos, for instance, about cross-border workers. Yeah. But to come back to also then, it's true, also ALDE says a lot about simplification and less bureaucracy for the internal market. And that is in there, but also with infrastructure, energy, the energy transition. But here also, it's very often a bit the same, transnational and cross-border. So that was our point. There is not a distinction really made. What type of instrument do we need for the border region? Yeah. Tim, do you have another question here?
Yeah, I'm also a bit looking for, we mentioned Interreg now, what should also be the character of Interreg? We first heard also as supporting governance as such, and it's important to have long-lasting cooperation, collaboration. But is it then currently fit for future as it is designed now? Maybe you or Teun can.
I mean, that's a nice, I think it's a really nice way to kick off. Is it future-proof? By the way, thanks for welcoming me as well. I used to also work at Klingendahl, which is kind of IPA's frenemy, let's say, in training and research. So it's nice to be here. And so you mentioned that you need to study Europe to understand it. I guess we all have the theoretical background as well, but I think practice is also very important. And Jeroen also has this practical background. You described this process of how parties establish policy manifestos. And that leads to sort of this term, I think, is constructive ambiguity, right? So you have wordings in party manifestos that reflect the very careful process of balance and compromise. Well, the sort of nice thing about Volt, is the party that I represent, is that we don't have that because we start the other way around. So you start with a movement, people that get together, and we had a sort of volunteer process where people could apply to write policies for the European Parliament elections. We had volunteers writing policy proposals. We had a meeting in Brussels. It was kind of a participatory democracy event where all the members could just show up and say, I disagree with this point, I like this point, let's change this. And if they had enough votes, it made it into the final policy. We managed to convince the French to give up their national nuclear deterrent for a European deterrent. If you can do this, you can do everything, I think, with a participatory democracy. But to get to the point, so yeah, you're right? There's a missing link in regional policies. And how do you make Interreg, for example, future-proof? Well, there's this picture here, I think, of it's made somewhere near Cannes, at least on the Belgian border. I don't know who made it, but well, I wake up every day seeing this, and I take a walk almost every day there because I live in Cannes now. I was also there in 2020 in March when COVID hit, and it was an absurd situation because I remember doing a little jog in the countryside, and I went through a little bush, little walking path. And when I went to walk back another direction, suddenly there was a police car there, or there is a lock on the road, or there is a sign saying you cannot enter back the Netherlands without a passport. So it was a very arbitrary, as you said, a very arbitrary enforcement of internal borders in a way. I think that's the key discussion. How do you make it less arbitrary? On Interreg, we've discussed many different points that I think are very, very valuable. I would add another thing is about the real long-term future, so how to make it future-proof. 2027 is the date when the new MFF gets adopted. It's also around this time where we have to think about the enlargement of the European Union again. You mentioned it's been 20 years since the previous enlargement round. If you're talking about border regions, we will have to talk about the fact that the European Union will enlarge. It can take 5 years, it'll take 10 years, but we don't know for sure, but it's going to happen. How does the European Union make itself future-proof in this sense as well? And that will mean, at least Volt believes this, it will mean, for example, that you have to at least double the current MFF in figures. It means that you have to think about how to change your cohesion policy, how to change your agricultural policy as well to make it ready for this enlargement round. And very concretely, for border regions that are currently not inside the European Union, think Moldova, think Ukraine, for example, the criteria right now, right, for this policy is that they should encourage levels, reducing disparities of development, growth, and quality of life. I would add another criteria, which is resilience, so that you can use also the cohesion policy to prepare countries getting into the European Union, to make them ready for enlargement, but also to make sure these border projects touch upon things like infrastructure development, mobility, energy, but even defense. That we have to tie these policies together and think about this for 2027. And this becomes an integral part as well of our cohesion policy for border regions. That's one main thing I would add. It's nice to be here in Maastricht to talk about enlargement of the European Union again, because this is also where we laid the foundations for that last time around.
So that means that we need, again, pre-enlargement funds who are also dedicated to cross-border elements. We had, of course, pre-enlargement funds 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when the new member states prepared for accession. What was my point now? Tim, do you have another question? Because I have lost it.
Well, I was a bit wondering, of course, when going through the Volt program, we screened all the manifestos. It's of course been very prominent as European, with a European approach. But there we were also looking at this idea of border regions as living labs of European integration, as a sort of, yeah, where you could test Europe, so to say, in small. Because in our opinion, this was not put that much emphasis on in the Volt program. So could you maybe elaborate a bit on that, like how you see border regions in the European?
So you're right, it's maybe not explicitly in there. I think that's something all our parties can reflect on, how to include this, you know, in the explicit wording of these policies. I'll give you some very practical examples. So a few months ago, I was in Czechia, because actually I was active first, not in Volt Netherlands, but in Volt Czechia. And they had 5 members 4 years ago. Now they have around 100. They had their launch event. They were established. And we met a Czech councillor of a border region on the Czech-German border, who didn't speak a word of English, He was a Volt councillor, and his whole basically mandate was about reconciliation between well, expatriated communities, right, on the former Sudetenland basically. There, the Volt angle is extremely useful because he can learn from similar reconciliation processes across borders in other European parts, other border regions in Europe. Another example is, for example, we have in the between the municipalities of Enschede and Münster, we have now, this is something that Volt in Enschede put up. Every month, the municipalities of both these cities meet and they talk, okay, how does our month program look like? What do we have to do to cooperate on a very practical level on employment, on social welfare, on transport, what's coming up on the agenda, how can we cooperate? I think that's also a good blueprint, because I think the added value of Volt is that you are on a local, regional, national, and European level. You're one movement, you have one program. It's not just about changing the rules. You mentioned, let's say, in introducing, for example, an impact assessment, a check for your regions. That could be a way to improve the situation, but you also have to change the culture. And the only way to change the culture, the way of doing things, is if you cooperate across borders on a municipal level, which is what Volt is, I think, also pioneering in the Netherlands and other places. So it's also about acting, right? And not just the way you change the rules of the system.
So, and at the municipal level, so multi-level, that you also bring down policies at also the lower levels. And now I know also, again, the point I would like to make, MFF, that is here, of course, a matter of course, a multi-financial framework. Perhaps there are people out there who do not actually know what MFF is. And let's come to the internal market and a very specific question. We have now a single market emergency instrument. There is a proposal on the table. We did a lot of research on COVID and the repercussions. And what is your idea? And probably I stay with you because you had a show. Yeah, and then we go back. So also to, in the first place, safeguard the internal market, but also the position of the border regions. What should be there also an element in this emergency instrument to make sure that also the border regions are not hit, as in the COVID crisis, extremely hard because of also European and national measures?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. As you said, indeed, we saw actually, indeed, with the COVID crisis that especially the border regions were hit quite hard. So in the sense that cross-border workers could not go to their offices or to their work anymore. Same for nurses or even students living in Belgium, well, not being able to go to the university here. So that actually showed that cross-border regions were quite vulnerable. And I think indeed, well, you just explained the MFF, so I will use it, but that is actually an extra argument as well. We just talked about Interact, but also these kind of type of crisis situation argues for having a special budgetary instrument for border cross regions. Indeed, the ECBM, just mentioned by you, I think it's a very, very useful instrument, which offers concrete solutions by, for instance, providing derogations between national member states, installing, let's say, coordination points cross-border, defining concrete projects, and this can be in all kinds of areas. We just mentioned it can be labor market, can be health, education, culture, whatever. So I would, or we as successor D66, we would definitely argue for a stronger ECBM here, a stronger cross-border mechanism. There, of course, we also need to see, let's say, the work of a ECBM towards also another instrument like the EGTS, which is more or less a similar, well, not similar, but also, let's say, a legal instrument for cross-border work projects. So, but they can be complementary. yeah, maybe that is a short answer, but I think it's a very positive development, and we would definitely support it from the DC66 point of view.
Yes, then we are in the middle of the debate about this very particular instruments for cross-border cooperation. And you mentioned the European cross-border mechanism, where the European Commission just came up with a revised proposal because the old one was rejected in the Council. It was a surprise. We thought that's a very good instrument, for instance, to make derogations possible at the border, but the Dutch government, the Belgian government, the German government, they were all against the idea. Now we have a new proposal on the table, which is very voluntary. We had a workshop in Brussels about the details. So in fact, it is setting up cross-border coordination points. That is more or less the basic idea. Fabienne, I don't know whether you are familiar with this proposal.
No, I'm not actually. So that's
the idea is that there should be a sort of obligation for member states to set up cross-border coordination points where people with a problem who have a cross-border project can go to and say, look, I have a project. I would like to see this obstacle moved away.
Yeah. I think it's important that people know where to go. So that from that point of view, I think it would be a good idea. That's it. Yeah.
Jeroen, you have seen also the whole evolution
Yes.
of this idea.
But I think that, I mean, you pinpoint the problem very clearly here, and this is what's rejected in the Council, as we often see when it comes to issues that could improve cooperation in the cross-border fashion, are in the end rejected in the capitals, because in the end capitals do not like to give away this kind of sovereignty. I remember when in 2008 I was doing an internship in the European Parliament, and we were working on the cross-border patients directive, together with, among others, Gert Essers. And one of the things we tried to improve from the Parliament side is why would we not make cross-border regions the possibility for pilot projects, so that we can make the cooperation between here, Maastricht Hospital, with Liège Hospital, with the Aachen Clinic, much easier. We abolish the internal insurance, health policy kind of obstacles that there are as a pilot project. First thing that got rid of at the negotiating table with the Council, because member states don't like this. Because in the end, also when we look at the lessons learned from COVID, I think the main issue in the end was not lack of budget or lack of instruments. It's a clear lack of political will in national capitals to coordinate measures. The whole idea that when in Belgium the bars were open and in the Netherlands they were closed, that we were surprised that Dutch people go sit on the terrace in Belgium, and that 3 months later we have the exact situation the other way around. It makes absolutely no sense, and it's the lack of coordination at the national level. And I think therefore it is really important that these kind of mechanisms we would have. I think the Luxembourg started under the presidency with a very sort of careful deliberation, but you see that's already too much. So I think if we want to make life in border regions easier, if we really want to have them as like living labs of European integration, then the answer is often not in Brussels. We can make the instruments and the budgets that we want, but the obstacle is more often lack of political will at the national level. And I think there we need to also work in The Hague, in Berlin, in Paris, and we can't only do that in the European Parliament. I think in the European Parliament, regardless of which party we represent, we could very easily get the majority together to get this done. But unless there is more of a conviction at the national level to actually do this, we'll see. It's the same. I mean, ITEM does also a great job with doing these cross-border impact assessments. That's something we need to go at the national level to look not only what national policy means in The Hague or Amsterdam or Rotterdam, but also what it means in Vaals or in Enschede or wherever. And this is something maybe we should do at the European level more often, also to make it more insightful what the added value could be of doing issues in a cross-border fashion.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, the support, abstract support for cross-border issues is in the Parliament very big. I checked the vote on your resolution for the European cross-border mechanism bridge. I think it was 90% or 95% were in favor. I think only ID, there were some.
There's always a couple of people who don't believe in the concept as such. But no,
Yeah.
but the
Yeah.
problem is, Martin, that at the abstract level of support at the capitals is also great. They could have all voted for the resolution, but to turn beautiful rhetoric into action on the ground, this is where we're having the missing link, as you already mentioned.
I think you would like to
No,
add.
no, one sentence just to underline what you're saying, because it's a super good example, because there actually you saw that the Euroregion Maas-Rijn was going much further than the European Directive for Patients, cross-border patients traffic, let's say. So I think it's an excellent example, so thank you.
And perhaps as an information item is also involved in a pilot foreign coordination point between the Netherlands and Flanders. We're more or less now checking out how can you set up a process where initiators come with a border obstacle, and then we analyze it, and hopefully we can give it to the ministries who then can also solve it. But as you said, it is also mainly we expect things that are not in Brussels, but that you can solve in the capitals, in the member states. Yeah. Perhaps we come to the infrastructure topic. And I know, Fabienne, that you worked a lot for also the industry, for Tata Steel, so also dealt with greening steel production, for instance. And we see now also big plans, transnational plans, make steel production greener with hydrogen and hydrogen pipelines. So I guess you have also there a sort of also perspective from industry with respect to their also to transnational and cross-border dimension also of the greening of industry.
Yes, I have. I worked at Tata Steel. I started in an HR job role, but later on I worked with the board on our green steel plan. And from that perspective, I think from industry in general, for them, I think it's important to talk about the strategic autonomy also of Europe, and think about what type of industry do you want to have at a national level, but also on a European level. So that's the first. And at Tata Steel, we have seen that there are many types of discussions. Should this company stay? Should it go? And where should it go? Then should we stop? And I don't think that's a good discussion. I think it's a good discussion to have that type of companies in the Netherlands, in Europe, but then talk about how can we make it more green? How can we make it more clean? How can we make it more circular? And then think of it that it's really a big transformation that type of companies have to do before they are green, clean, and circular. And they need governments. They need also their own money, but also maybe sometimes a little bit from government's funding to make that transition. And for me, it's not a good idea to just to let it go away from the Netherlands or from Europe.
Is there also cross-border dimension, for instance, for the Benelux? Deputy Secretary General from the Benelux with us, with respect to the cooperation, really a concrete cooperation of the big industry in the Benelux area, in the steel sector?
In steel, you mean, a cooperation, I don't know, but think about Gemmelot as well. It is important that we have it for the Netherlands. We have it in Limburg. It's important that it stays. But even there, the same type of questions arise about how can we do it in a more clean production way. So I think it's important to have it. And I know also that in other countries, in Belgium, in Germany, in Luxembourg, they have the same type of questions about their industry. And also at the European level, there is the Green Deal, but there are no many businesses that have said, okay, we want to have an industrial deal as well. Not to say, okay, the Green Deal is not a good deal, but to complement it and say we can do it together because we as companies can make great steps in making the world a bit more clean.
I think we come to the topic European democracy, which is.
Could I maybe still?
Okay.
Could I add some brief words still on
sorry.
that? Sorry, but maybe Jeroen because he has to leave earlier. But
Yeah, I'm really sorry, but with the debate tonight we have Ursula von der Leyen coming, and she insisted on having a piece of echte Limburgse vlaai before she goes into the debate. So we're meeting her at the bakery now. So I have to.
Yes, no problem.
I have to leave, but maybe if I get one small concluding remark, because I think it's two things very important. One, all our manifestos have been tested on the sort of cross-border region interact aspects, and we've all somewhat failed, which is also in a way a good thing, because as you said, this is in the run-up to 2027, which means there is still ample time also to influence the European political parties in how the future cohesion funding and interact will look like. So I would first of all propose that we do this meeting again next year, when all of us have been newly or re-elected, and we can work on it in our respective groups to make sure that the Parliament's position towards the new interact is really good. And the other thing, what I think we all share today, is that cross-border region and cross-border cooperation is much more than only the programs and the funding. It is about mentality, it's about culture, it is about cooperation in all kinds of fields, whether it's justice and law cooperation, whether it's climate, whether it's water, and this all needs to be one big pack together. And then how the more people from Limburg we get elected into the next parliament, the bigger the chance of success, I would say, in the next year. So thank you very much for having me, and I hope I'll see you all tonight at the debate as well. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jeroen.
So maybe
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, perhaps
If I may.
Karin would like to make a short comment, and then I
Yes.
give the word to you.
Thank you. Yeah, from a Benelux point of view, no, indeed, as mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I know well, so I look at the audience, but especially also at you. So for me, indeed, I made a point already. It's about building an EU energy network, and that means one energy union, cross-border, also at Benelux scale. What does it mean for Limburg? I mean, that means that through, let's say, the national project, Wind op Zee, so wind at sea, Maasbracht is connected. So they will get 380 kilowatts of energy, I think, for the first year. That's to be estimated. I think that's more or less the figure. There, then also, not only from an energy point of view, Gemmelot was already mentioned. Indeed, Gemmelot will be connected to the Delta Rhine corridor. Very important also for the delivery of hydrogen to one of our most important industries here in Limburg. And then, of course, well, not mentioned yet, but the 10T, of course, the revision has just been approved, also had implications also for Limburg, so the trans-European networks transport. 2 urban nodes, Venlo, Maastricht. Of course, the recognition of our inland ports, the inland ports in Limburg, also from a point of view of energy transition. And of course, Gemmelot, I've been mentioning, and of course, the high-speed connections. So if you talk about infrastructure, I would say it's both transport and energy. Thank you.
There is a lot about energy transition and also climate change in the manifesto fold. So I guess you also have to add to that.
The Green Deal says climate net neutrality by 2050. We want it by 2040. You can find in the 80-page manifesto we wrote how we're going to get there. I'm not an energy expert, but I think what we're talking about now is, and while Jeroen is having a piece of lie with von der Leyen, is how do we increase the size of the pie as a whole? So when you're thinking about these kind of cross-border initiatives, also when it comes to industry, so you can think about something like, we mentioned green steel initiatives. So I had a walk a few months ago to Liège. It took a whole day, and then you come across, of course, these very areas that are now basically an industrial rust belt, which used to be a massive industrial hub in the EU region. When you're looking at ways to revitalize this region now from the Belgian perspective as well, like the Trilogie port, for example, in Liège, but to have both sea, air, and land transport corridor. These are precisely the kind of things where the Netherlands and Germany and Belgium could cooperate to make sure that the impact of such infrastructural measures, can be felt on a wider European scale, and not just for single countries. It can also go wrong in the social welfare sense. I think we talked before about these sort of employment measures. What comes to mind immediately is TOZO. There was this scheme during COVID, right, where people living in basically Belgium but working in the Netherlands, because of Dutch interpretation of this European policy, they couldn't receive basically compensation during COVID times, which was a bureaucratic administrative overlook. So again, you're thinking about employment also in the sense of a national way of thinking about this and a misinterpretation of the law. I think the solution to this overall is also cross-border democracy. You see this, for example, now when it comes to the NC-groepen, which closed down in 2020 in the Netherlands because of pressure from citizens. But I think in Belgium, there's now exploratory talks to continue it there. If you have cross-border participatory democracy, where across border citizens unite and they talk about this issue, you can have a much wider geographic horizon to think about what might come up in the next 5 or 10 years, also for the environment that you talked about. So I think this is a wider solution. It's a cultural change of thinking that you also that you act and you organize democracy on a cross-border way. I think that's the big solution to this. And there are good examples of how it can work when municipalities and regions do cooperate, also in terms of infrastructure, big projects like the Einstein telescope, for example. It's a good example of how it can work. But more often than not, I think it's a matter of information asymmetry and just sometimes misinterpreting laws, right? So that's why you have to change the culture, you have to change the way people communicate across municipalities in practice, not just by changing laws.
Yes, and we close then also this debate with the question of democratic instruments, because that's also mentioned in some of the manifestos. We did research, for instance, on participation in projects in a border region, and it's true, we see more and more conflicts now, especially with respect to wind turbines, that on the Dutch side, people are not happy with the wind turbines on the German side. I think in Lixhe and Easton, there was a question of a biomass power plant. So, and it's really popping up. We see that the province of Zeeland is now also going to the court against Flanders because of a permission for an industrial site. So there is an issue with information, participation, communication across the border with this type of big infrastructure projects. In general, we see in the manifestos also elements about the voting system. What about the European lists, for instance? People in border regions, they have to some extent sometimes two identities, like me, where it's sometimes difficult whether I'm more on the German or Dutch side. So, Fabienne, are you in favor to have, for instance, European lists where you can say, I don't vote for candidates on a national list for the European Parliament who are on a European list?
No, I do not actually, because I think it's already difficult sometimes for people to know their own candidates from a national perspective. And if you make it more broad and wide and you have lists from other type of countries, I don't think it makes politics more nearby for people. So I think it's important that it says the national list.
For once, I think we disagree on something today. I think if you have candidates from different, if you have a candidate from Liège or from Aachen or from Maastricht, and they talk about cross-border issues that are very real, very direct, very practical, I think you can create more connection between Dutch voters and European Parliament than you would between a Dutch voter from Limburg and The Hague quite often. I think these connections are to be found much more directly and practically here in Limburg. And I'll give you another concrete thing which we can do is, for example, you're thinking about a number, it's 17 million. There are 17 million people who don't necessarily live permanently in one European country or another, but they're mobile citizens. They already have the right to vote in different types of elections. We are in favor of giving them the right to also vote in European and municipal elections for mobile citizens. That's one thing you can do. I think there's 30% or something of European citizens who already live in a EU region, in a border region. I think you have to include them. You have to give them options which are for them much more meaningful than, for example, sometimes having a national candidate which feels much further away. And it's especially the case for language. So when you're looking at Limburg, for example, sometimes in Kerkrade or other cities, I think it makes more sense to teach people German and to engage in cross-border cultural contact with Germany than with sometimes maybe The Hague. And there you can also find politics taking root in cross-border regions that way. So I think that's something, it's actually the solution, not the problem, would be to have transnationalism, would be to have more cross-border political.
Perhaps also linking the question of the voting with the question of the Spitzenkandidaten. We have the debate tonight, and the idea behind the Spitzenkandidaten system was that you have a bit less complexity. You say there is a political family and you have a Lijsttrekker, Spitzenkandidat at the top, and then you vote for him or her, and finally she or he will be the president of the European Commission. So we know that failed a bit last time because Ursula von der Leyen was not on the list. But what about the system, Kai? Do you see there is a purpose to keep that ongoing and to say, yes, that's a good thing?
Yes, allow me very short on the previous question and then Spitzenkandidaten. Of course, we think as D66 that, well, you identify yourself with the region you live in. So we do hope that for the next EU elections, we are able to vote for maybe our neighbor in Germany or in Flanders or Wallonie. So that would be great. So no, but the Spitzenkandidaten, yeah, well, from our point of view, we have 3. So which is a bit maybe out of the ordinary, but later today, I'm happy to listen to, of course, Strack-Zimmermann from FDP. So she's a very strong candidate here. And yeah, so let's see how it will go. I mean, I'm actually neutral towards this procedure. And well, so far, so good, but let's see what will happen. Thank you.
Perhaps it's also time to give the floor to you or to our colleagues online. I don't know, do we also have written questions in the chat so far? Remarks, okay. So I give the floor here, please.
Yes, since the Benelux was mentioned, so I profit from once again the opportunity to thank you for organizing this meeting. Came all the way from Brussels, but it's no problem as this is a marvelous city. Now, the point is the following. What about the principle of subsidiarity? Because you have spoken about instruments of the European Commission, European Union. There is also Benelux instruments. There are Interreg and JECT, Groupement d'intérêt territorial. Translation of this in English is the same. So sometimes it's a bit complicated, but basically there is indeed a capacity to act at regional and national and local level. So how would you articulate between this principle and policies, and what is the best for each level? Well, it's a big question, but well, subsidiarity is the key.
I have to say, we haven't read the word subsidiarity a lot in the manifestos, as far as I know. No. Who wants to? Please.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think a very good question. At least I think we don't want more national sovereignty. I mean, especially now in times of crisis, I think we rather would go for more EU policies, looking at the energy crisis, the crisis at the Ukrainian, the war on Ukraine. I should correct myself. And indeed, I had the same thinking as you. Of course, we have in our treaties a subsidiarity. I think it could be good to have a kind of horizontal subsidiarity instrument for regions, but maybe for particular policy themes, I would say. So we've been mentioning a couple. Of course, we have had just concluded the Benelux police agreement. So which I think is really a very good example in this case. So yeah, maybe that as a short remark to your subsidiarity question, but yeah, I think they can live next to each other, but maybe a bit more focused on for regions. Thank you.
Briefly add, I think I agree with it, and also the principle that subsidiarity could be a theoretical principle, it could be a practice. And when you think about the theoretical principle, there are procedures to trigger, right? When member states don't agree with a decision by the Commission to introduce a certain law, you call this the yellow card and the red card procedure. But in practice, it's often not used because subsidiarity has to be woven through the lawmaking. It has to be woven through the practice of the lawmakers. And I think when you talk about this particular issue, the best way to address this is if national, European, and local members of parliament work more together on a daily basis. So there's also sort of a culture, of a social culture of information exchange that's constant. A few of us here are good examples of this, I would say. So, you know, it's much more about growing the practice of subsidiarity in your lawmaking rather than relying on, let's say, instruments. I think this is often in the reality of Brussels lawmaking overlooked, how much it's really about this sort of constant exchange of information and relationships as well in a transparent way.
Yeah, I agree actually with Karen. For the first time, I think the VVD is now more open towards the European level, the policy making at the European level. Before we were a bit hesitant because we thought, okay, we can do that as a national government as well. And now I think because of the crisis, because of the war, because of migration, because of the climate questions, I think it is important that that European level will be strengthened in policy sense. And also when I look back at the past couple of years, I think it was the most intense policy time since the law. I really think that. And I think that will increase even more. And therefore, I think the European level will be strengthened actually, also from the liberal perspective and also from the VVD party.
From our research point of view, we saw both things, that we need more European policies to some extent, but that we also need a sort of horizontal subsidiarity principle in border regions, that you say where things can be better managed at the cross-border level in a region, then we should do that. Cooperation of hospitals was for us a big thing during COVID crisis, that there was a top-down steering from The Hague and we could not coordinate with the regional hospitals. So the principle of horizontal subsidiarity is what we really promote in our research. Hildegard, please. If you could use the microphone for it.
Hildegard Schneider, Maastricht University. What seems to me missed also in the various programs and manifestos is the concept of European citizenship. And actually, we talk about elections. So it's the one who will go to elections. And what I miss in so far is how to make this election attractive to the European citizen. And therefore, I also think if 30% live in border regions, we have to show from which party perspective at all that this cooperation is a necessity and also in their interest. So I think the next months, all parties should really, at least the ones who are in favor of European cooperation on various levels, should really concentrate and show that this cross-border cooperation in all levels, including horizontal cooperation, is of utmost importance. And I would say, if we don't want another crisis, we don't need a European Parliament contrary to the European integration process. So if we don't want another crisis for the next years, we should really stimulate European citizens to vote. And it's not only because European citizenship is grounded in Maastricht. So from that perspective. So this is, let's say, a point for all of you, that this is essential for the elections. And there, I think also in Brussels, it's a missed opportunity to show more the interest on regional level to all citizens living.
Thanks a lot, Hildegard. And did you know that 10 years ago, because we celebrate 10 years ITEM, Hildegard Schneider was one of the founding mothers of ITEM, and because of her initiative, we are here today celebrating 10 years of ITEM. Thanks a lot. And Anouk, I think we close because that was the idea. Is there a, oh, sorry, Bob, I didn't see.
If I still have time to ask a question, thank you for the candidates for their input. I work at the city region of Parks and Limburg here close by, and we cooperate very closely with our Aachen neighbors, the city region of Aachen and the city of Aachen. So those monthly meetings between Enschede and Münster, we have them also on a monthly basis to talk about policies in the future. And I had one particular question to all the candidates. Maybe a very quick answer would suffice, although it's quite a complicated topic, I guess. We are seeking to establish, and we've talked about it with hospitals cooperating with each other, for a so-called experiment room, or Experimentierraum in German. That's something. To be honest, I haven't read all the manifestos yet, so maybe there's a lot of talk about experiment areas within cross-border regions. But my question is that something you would try to establish at the European Parliament, or maybe? And if you have ideas about it, then I'm happy to listen to them, and maybe I could give you some input from our side. Thank you.
I think that comes back also to ideas of the European cross-border mechanism, to have a sort of derogation clause that you can also have a type of cooperation that is beyond national legislation. Briefly, any ideas?
Well, at the moment, no ideas, but I'm happy to listen to you and to hear what you need, actually, because not only today, but also when all these Limburg candidates come in, it's important to know about your initiative. So please, let's get into contact.
Yeah, in the health sector, there are some projects. For instance, the hospital in Maastricht is cooperating with Liège and Aachen. There will be an Interreg project on the child surgery, pediatric surgery, to work together and to have a sort of also entity. And there is also the question whether you can derogate from insurance obligations, that some national insurances have some obligations, and whether this is then, you can avoid that if you have a cross-border project.
Yes. I actually thought of the same, the derogation principle, but to think a bit beyond that, and also looking at Hildegard. I would say we should do something with the outcomes of the Conference of the Future of Europe. And I think we should actively use there, let's say, the proposition used on the citizens panels. This could be maybe an example to do it. And there's also, of course, the system that the European Parliament, let's say, every, I don't know how many weeks, I look now at you, you know that, Peter, that the European Parliament talks to our national parliaments. It's once every 2 months, 3 months, I don't know. But that you could also do with, let's say, the regional parliaments, I call them like that, or the regional ministers, also on these topics. So maybe thinking a bit out of the box and also looking to your previous remarks. Thank you.
Yeah, totally agree. And we shouldn't just, like you said, just do something on the Conference on the Future of Europe, but indeed think about citizen panel. I would say even we establish on a European scale a permanent deliberative chamber, basically, of citizens. That's something we would be in favor of. But what your example is, it's spontaneous. That's the great thing about it. It happens spontaneously between municipalities. People find each other organically. I would say the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity is to provide funding and provide mechanisms for those things to happen organically everywhere in Europe. And that's where we come back to the issue of spreading information and connecting people. And that's the main thing. You won't solve it by institutional mechanisms. I will also, when I'm on campaign, give examples like this all the time to show also to voters that this is possible. But it's also just a matter of making the funding available for these kind of things. So long answer short, yes, let's do it. And let's do it both on a European level and exactly on a local level, these kind of deliberative systems. The Belgians, I think, have in the German-speaking region, they have a citizen panel. It's been proven to be quite successful. Let's experiment with these kind of things in different levels and see how Europe can be a sort of democratic experiment still in the 21st century. I think it's a great example.
The French-German border, I was once involved in a citizens panel. They had that in a cross-border way. So we could also see what type of experience did they have with this panel. So thank you very much. I think we have now really to conclude. Thank you very much for coming. And Anouk, would you like to have the famous last words? Because from our side, Pim and me, we would like you to read really our analysis because there is more in it. Please have a look at the different topics we mentioned there. And thanks a lot for the interest.
Well, okay. Well, I think it is very important that we have been here this afternoon. Key is cooperation, not only cross-border, but also multi-level, and also cooperation between all of us. As we can see, knowledge cannot function without policy, but policy cannot function without knowledge. And we all need each other in this perspective. And I think it is a very good argument putting forward to involve the EU citizens as such, because if we want to make a better cross-border regions in Europe, we all need each other in that perspective. So I really would like to thank the panelists, Fabienne Hendricks, thank you very much. Karen, very thankful, and thank you. Also, thank you, Teun Jansen, for your input. Also, Jeroen, who has left already the building. And of course, also a very thank you to Elman Frans Bastiaans for being here, and also to welcome us in the beautiful city of Maastricht. And we are also looking in that way to the cooperation altogether, because we need all levels here today. So thank you very much. I have a little gift for the candidates and for you, Frans. And we see each other later on this day, and also after this day, we will continue seeing each other and exchanging information and knowledge. Thank you very much.